ngayang nga chatuka. Otasa lira cheli sikuri ngole hani tumuta mai tutiu. Ngunoheni Sirangi, and tonight I have the privilege of facilitating this conversation. We're going to be talking about sustainability in terms of language, fäanga, and culture, hanua. And tonight I'm also feeling very honored that I get to have this conversation with these people on the screen that you can see. I've known these guys for a few years now. They've helped me with my transition into New Zealand. They've helped me with my journey to learning the language, but also just being rooted in my cultural identity as a Rotuman here in the Diaspora. So I'm going to get them all to introduce themselves. We'll start with Joe, and then we'll move across all the way to Russell.
Anga tatako o toasa moluseo toleani Joseph Tolani Munising o whane so kama tutu ang siama asao e vai tupu tuvalu mangonohe kirikiri roa e Waikato e Nusirangi. Hello everybody, my name is Maluseo Joseph Tolani Munisi, a short novel, and I am currently positioned in kirikiri roa in the mighty Waikato in New Zealand. Kia ora.
Thank you, Joe. Helena?
No ai tēnei ngā koa toasa Helena Erisito ngole on hareta ma ieli Erisito to whata whane hapmak ma losa ma to henda hene o inafa ma malhahang. Ngono e Palmerston North, Nusirangi. Kia ora everyone, my name is Helena. I am from the island of Rotuman and I live in Palmerston North, New Zealand.
Nice. Philo?
No ai ngā koa toasa le Philomena de Lai. O to henta hene chuchu ma pepche Rotuma ma la kemba e lau ma ngono e Auckland e Nusirangi. So hello everyone, my name is Philomena Delai. I'm actually Fijian and my mom's from Rotuma, from Chuchu and Pepche, and I live in Auckland, New Zealand. Kia ora everybody.
Nice. And all the way from Australia we have Thierry.
Nā ngā tatakoa o toasa Thierry Heritage. I'm an Australian-born Rotuman Kaiviti. I'm currently living on Hanua country in Canberra, and yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. And somewhere in Oinapa we have Russell.
Nā ngā tatakoa o toasa Russell Verasi, ngō whane o Oinapa Rotuma, mangonohe Auckland e ni.
Nice.
Hi everyone, I'm Russell. I'm from Oinapa, currently in Auckland.
Thank you. Okay, so tonight we only have two questions. And the first question that we're going to discuss is, how do you sustain the Rotuman language here, like living in the diaspora? And we're going to go in the same order, but if you have thoughts that you want to add, like, well, before anyone else talks, you can feel free to jump in. So we'll start with Maluseo.
Is this a good idea? I just wanted to make sure. I'm just gonna give an opportunity for the ladies in the space to go through. So I really do want to go first, and my ethical narcissism says yes, but also my respect for the ladies in the room. I would love to gift it over to Helena, if you'd like to start us off, if that feels comfortable for you.
I think Philo wanted to start us off.
I always want to go first.
Yeah.
I'll go first. So what was the first question? Right. How do you sustain our language in the diaspora? For me personally, I feel like the big word that really jumped out to me is being intentional, like being away from the country, being away, not on the island. You don't hear it every day. So in order to learn and sustain it, you have to be really intentional in it. You have to purposely put yourself in spaces, surround yourself with people, and with the sole purpose of learning. You can't just naturally, surround yourself with all that. And I think that's the biggest issue that we all face here. And yeah, and how I do that, honestly, is, creating spaces like this. All these people here I met online and then, met in person, and we have Zoom talks all the time. Being involved in the community, whether it be online, like I said before, as well as in person, just purposefully, intentionally surrounding myself in it.
Nice. Oh, and I just want to add that Philo actually does a lot of work for the community. and she holds a lot of safe spaces for people who are on their journey to finding themselves as Rotuman here in New Zealand. So yeah, thank you for your work.
Thank you. I don't speak Rotuman. I speak Fijian, and then coming to New Zealand is when I started to learn Rotuman. So I felt like it was important to do that for other people as well that are in the same shoes as I am. Hopefully, someone else can learn as well.
Yeah. Nice. So do we want to move to Thierry or Helena? Thierry? Oh, Helena?
Okay, I'll go. It's different for me because I grew up in Rotuman, and I know the language, but ever since coming here, we don't speak it frequently, and being away, having gone away from home for the last couple of years, how I sustain is just actively participating in in the space, and trying to, not just me, but trying to get everyone that I know that's Rotuman, being in the community, because I feel like being away from home, that's a big thing, and helping everyone come into that space and creating a safe space, like Philo said, is very important to me. So yeah, active participation to me is what I think is how I'm sustaining my language. And being back at home, with mom and dad around, they're always talking in Rotuman. So sometimes, I find myself sometimes speaking in English, and then I'm like, wait a minute, why am I doing this? I will have to actively, in myself know that, oh, if they're speaking Rotuman, I will speak Rotuman back, or I start the conversation in Rotuman. So that's how I'm actively sustaining.
I think that's also a really interesting point, for me as well. Both my parents, they do speak the language, but we don't really speak Rotuman at home. It's mostly English. But being intentional about having those conversations in Rotuman, even if it's just the little things like hello. For me, the only time we speak Rotuman is if we want to hang about someone else. Or if mom's telling us off in public, it's always with a
it's always in Rotuman, right? Yeah. And that's it's really good. And I've said some words that my mom and dad are like, I think you're saying it wrong. You're saying it wrong. And I'm like, no, it's right. And they're like, no, you're saying it wrong. So, when you're practicing the language, it's fine to, have mistakes here and there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that also comes back to having safe spaces. Philo said she didn't really learn Rotuman until she moved here, which is quite similar for me. I know the language because I grew up, my family speaks Rotuman, and we lived in the island for a year. But I never really learned the language because our language is quite difficult to read and write. I only started learning here in New Zealand. That's where I met Russell in one of the Rotuman language classes. So yeah, just a plug there. There's classes run here in New Zealand if you want to learn the language. What
you
about
have to move to New Zealand though?
They're online. They're online.
Yeah. That goes back to being intentional. You have to actually sign up to the classes.
Yeah.
And the classes are Lele Po.
Oh, wow.
Come on. Thierry?
I think with the question, I think it's a great question because I'm not really in sustaining the language very well in Australia or personally, which made me think about what's our version of sustaining, keeping something very relevant and in the forefront. For some people isn't a possibility, and that's for me. My grandparents do speak Rotuman, but yeah, same kind of context. It's usually where they don't want me to know what they're talking about. But very rarely do they speak Rotuman, and they migrated over in the 80s, 90s. And then my mom doesn't. So that generation just above me didn't speak any Rotuman, and then me didn't know anything really other than slang and all the naughty words and stuff like that. So I've actually found it very hard because unless you are somebody who's passionate and maybe has access to a fluent Rotuman speaking person to bounce off, it's really hard for me to keep building. I kind of just keep going over the same 5 steps over and over again. But I've tried to to find a different way about it, because it's just not working conversationally unless I'm like jumping in on these groups and sessions. I have nobody to really bounce off, but I'm enjoying a lot of like music, a lot of the old songs. I noticed that like my pronunciation is getting better, like much better. I just don't know what I'm saying. So it's that writing it down and kind of translating it for yourself. I get like family members to write me like messages in Rotuman. And so then for me to like be able to figure out what it's saying, I obviously have to translate it and stuff like that. So I guess it's just alternative ways. I did have a discussion with some family members about the fact that I know more Samoan and Maori words than even like Fijian words, because like, you know, like fono and talanoa and all those kinds of things are so casually integrated into our mainstream media and social media and what we see all the time, because those cultures are so massive and proud of their language as well. Not to say that we're not any less proud, but they have the people and resources to do that, to put it out there and stuff like that. So I've been trying to be a bit more intentional about making sure the words I'm using is not like aroha, it's hanisi. Like, you know, I'm making sure that I'm putting in those little words into my English usage in life and then also online. And I think that really helps a lot with me particularly, and I hope it helps other people as well. And we get more comfortable, and then it'll become broken Rotuman English, and then hopefully will lead into fluent Rotuman for me.
Yeah, I think, well, Philo just put in the chat, Notch media is important, and I feel like that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about Rotuman Language Week and how it's like online and the resources we get from that. But also like what I found really interesting from what you said is I never actually realized, you know, the privilege that, you know, some of us have having that accessibility. So that, yeah, that was a good takeaway for me. We'll move to Russell.
I think there's two things that Philo said that really caught my ear. The first one was that you guys have had other Zoom meetings without me. The second was the intentional bit. I think that is really the crux of it. If we're going to talk about sustainability, it is the crux of it, is to be intentional. I think in New Zealand, we're fortunate to see the effects of what, you know, the systematic eradication of a language can do, like they did with Te Reo over time. On the flip side, we can also see, you know, what a roadmap looks like to bring it back. But, you know, I think the issue is, while there's no systematic eradication of our language, I think it's the complacency is our real danger, and that over time, that complacency can bastardize the language itself. And I think the intentional bit, I think of, has to do a lot with our culture, and the traditional scenarios that we have, because that's, I think, you know, the formal way of speaking our language and the way that we speak our language informally is very different.
Yeah.
And, you know, our informal language is already bastardized from what the missionaries put together for us. So we could communicate with one another, versus some of the words we know what they mean, but we you know, we couldn't trace the etymology of where they come from. But yeah, so for me, it's really actually being intentional with the traditions that we have. And that, I think, is going to push a lot of the sustainability with the language and speaking the right way in the right times, knowing how to structure and what words to use and who to address first, and all those types of protocols. Yeah,
and I think, like, just from what you said, one thing that, you know, popped out for me was, you know, a lot of our parents, they do speak the language, but they, you know, they don't really speak it in our homes. And I'm not saying that, you know, they're evil for doing that. I think it's also like something that they're conditioned. You know, we live in a Western society. English is the go-to. But yeah, like, again, intentionality. Thank you for that, Russell. We'll move to our, oh, sorry, Thierry.
Sorry, I wanted to like kind of mix the point that Russell tapped on, and as well Philo. With sustainability, I think there also needs to be, which there is, like all of you do create safe spaces, but that kind of intention with the safe space and with encouraging others to to use and to fail and learn is really important. Sometimes we can, and not just in Rotuman, like other Pacific languages, we can become very harsh critics. And I think that's why people do shy away from even sharing wrongly. Like that's the only way you are going to learn, and is if you practice and practice and then get it right. So I think that's really important for our sustainability of language, is just being a bit more gentle with one another.
Yeah, and honestly, for me, that's one of the things like I've really enjoyed about getting to know Joe. Like he's always allowed me to, he's always encouraged me, even if I pronounce it wrong, just say it, like, just speak the Rotuman, even if it like people don't think that it's in the right context or it's pronounced well, like, just to have that, just to be brave and just speak it, regardless of what people are going to think. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like a lot to do with our youth. They were brought up here. Most of them were born here, so it's getting into that safe space to realize I can speak Rotuman, like no matter how broken, they can still do it, and it's just trying to encourage them, trying to find a way that they're okay to speak up, because in most cases, like when we have events, we're actively telling our youth, oh, it's like you go and do this, and they're always shying back because of the fact that, oh, I actually don't know how to do it. But I think as much as we have the intention to put them in, it's also important to make sure that they are okay in those spaces to go out and do what is Rotuman, I guess. Yeah.
I want to step on that as well. Sorry. Yeah, a lot of the times I feel like, we're always like pushing kids out there to do stuff and they don't want to do it because they're shy. But I feel like, from my point of view anyway, as soon as I put aside that embarrassment or like being afraid of getting it wrong, you learn quicker.
Yeah.
Like, you just go out there, you do it, you get embarrassed, but then next time you're not going to do it again. So yeah, I think from a learning perspective, one, be encouraging, but also as a learner, don't be afraid to make mistakes.
And I think it also like highlights the importance of our role in just not just creating those spaces, but like leading from the front, like speaking even though it embarrasses us, that gives them the confidence to also make those mistakes. We'll go to the biggest knowledge holder here in our meeting tonight, Malusil.
Man, y'all always been putting me up on a pedestal that it's already too heavy to hold me. So, you better not. Before I start, I do want to offer it to you. Would you like, what's your perspective on this? What's your take on this?
Honestly, I feel like it wasn't until I moved here that I realized how important it is for me to actually like be like intentional, like everyone said, about my journey in speaking the language. When we lived in Rotuman, I couldn't speak the language at all. I could understand it. I feel like everyone, who grows up in sort of Rotuman circles, it was easy for me to like understand what they were saying, but it was hard for me to like, formulate conversations. And it wasn't until I moved here and I was like really, I felt cut off from, that connection to the island and stuff, that I started realizing the importance of speaking the language. And like now I don't have kids yet, but I definitely want my kids, I want to create those spaces for them. Like I want, when I look back in the future, I want to know that, they saw me lead by example, like they saw me engage in the spaces. And I think it's also like important, like to remember that, when we say sustaining our language, we like, it almost feels like, and this is what a point that Joe made me aware of, like we always make it feel like we're losing our language, but we still have our language, like it's not lost, we still have it. So, while we do, like Russell said, we might as well like, learn from the other people, like the other cultures who don't have the privilege that we do have.
Man, thank you for that. I really wanted to make sure that you were a part of this conversation, because even though you're facilitating this, very much you're very much a part of the the ingredients and the recipe of what sustaining the language looks like. I do have my own perspectives, but I wanted to actually have a conversation with everybody else's te whakanisi or their koha, so their gift into this perspective. 100% echo, Philo, you and your perspectives around intentionality, purposeful, and learning. And I really do like the way that you talk about the issues that we face. And I feel like that's something that, for me, in my personal opinion, we have an opportunity to reflect our realities, right? So I feel like when we look at facing issues around sustainability, why is this conversation important to the Rotuman journey, right? And why is this important in relation to Aotearoa specificity? And why is this important to us as a conversation right now? And I feel like when we look and dive into those perspectives of why sustainability is a conversational buzzword, I feel like on a big consciousness or mass level worldwide, sustainability is trending, but I feel like we need to really look at the Rotuman plight as a baby in regards to what it's doing, and a baby not in its and belittling it, but a baby in regards to its journey, and honoring the journey. We have a different conversation, which I believe is not sustainability, but it's really important that we get the media right, Philo. I feel like you got it right there when we're looking at online and offline communities. This is about being seen, being visible, being heard for what we are, how we are, and where we are. And I feel like in a lot of conversations, there's a lot of generalized terms, like, Rotuma is an endangered language. And I'm like, compared to who? Are we comparing Rotuma to Rotuma's plight, or are we comparing Rotuma to all the other islands or all the other mass populations where it's obvious that we're not in the right, we're not in the race? It is very, very obvious. And I feel like that's the reflection of reality that I'm missing in these conversations when we talk about academia, when we talk about social media, and I'm this specificity. Why does this matter? And for whom does this matter? And who is bringing this issue to the table? Because a lot of the times when I'm in proximity to these conversations, it's always like, oh, well, UNESCO's thing. And I'm like, that's true based on their reflections of how they research all of those things. But what is true to Rotuma, and who's asking that question? Who's invested in that question about specificity around Rotuma and the diaspora, which I love that your conversation actually is around the diaspora. And to me, Helena, I 100% back you up. Active participation is a thing, but also you mentioned around safe spaces. And to me, it's not safe when we're not able to reflect our own realities. And that's something that I feel like is a massive silencing mechanism that continuously hinders connection. And it builds fragility at its maximum, where it's like, okay, now we just foster in fragility, and that's trauma bonding. And I'm not calling it out. I'm more so calling it in to see if anybody else feels that way, to see if anybody else has experienced that, because I've experienced that in multiple different layers. And it's not to call, because I feel like, Helena, when you were talking about our parents, I deeply resonate with our parents' plight, because they're in survival mode. And Richelle, you talked about that as well. They're in survival mode. They're in a new paradigm of systems, which you talked about, Russell, and I do actually believe that we have our own systematic eradication. We have our own systematic erasure, and that's because we keep on leaning on Western matrices of success and Western matrices of outcomes and Western matrices of how do we get there. And I'm like, to me, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right that we're always on this treadmill, always continuously striving to meet what? Overachievement, to meet burnout, to meet, what is it? Because I'm like, we're working twice as hard to even be here. You know what I mean? And to be at the table of decisions. And then I'm like this, if that's not leadership, then what are we trying to build as a Rotuman? As this idealistic Rotumanist, or this idealistic whatever it is that we're building, what are we doing in that space? And that's why for me it's really important that we just be really explicit about what we're feeling implicitly, what we're actually experiencing implicitly. And it's to do with critical distancing. And I think, Thierry, you mentioned this around access barriers, and access barriers are systemic erasure. Access barriers are exactly that. And I just really, yeah, I'm really inspired by the conversations that everybody else has brought to the table, because for me, the common theme that I'm hearing around intentionality XYZ is actually just meet the person. Meet me where I'm at with my language journey, meet me where I'm at with my culture journey, meet me where I'm at with my life journey, and invest in that. Invest in me, as opposed to looking at all of these, because I'm like, yo, everybody's got the unique specificity, the unique remedies that they can bring for themselves. And I'm like, we need tools and remedies more than accusations, shame and guilt, and all of these XYZ. But in true honesty, I feel like it's an opportunity. Like when I look at sustainability, and when I look at all of these things, it's an opportunity to be autonomous with our self-determining tail. So what is our Rotuman tail? And to me, I use the word hanuchu because in my head, I'm like, it has no boundaries, and it has no like, and I proclaim myself as a hanuchuologist, but not as a hanuchuologist that's on Rotuma. I'm a hanuchuologist that's in the specificities of Kirikiriroa, that's under the safe guardianship of Ngāti Haua, Ngāti Wairere, and Ngāti Mahanga. And they have given me the strength through trans-indigenous modalities of expressions of why I can show up as a future ancestor of Rotuma, and as a current ancestor of Rotuma, because I'm like this. I'm not trying to like play this futurizing game where I'm like, I'm enough as I am right now. Like, I'm Rotuman as a birthright, and the language and all of the different tools help me articulate my Rotuman experience. So to me, yes, the language is very important, but also I feel like we need to get an understanding or collective conversation around what it is to be a Rotuman, because it's changed and shifted and evolved even through the 1800s, even through the 1900s, and currently in the 2000s. And we're still kind of looking back at this not enoughness game. And I'm like, this not enoughness game is very much plugged in for us, right? It's already like, it's almost like the low hanging fruit of our journey of being like, I'm not enough. So I feel shame and guilt around XYZ. And I'm like, why is that? We are currently in a Western paradigm, but so it's not so much the West, it's more so around the domineering tactics. So to me, I don't like to lean on, because I feel like colonization, all of those things, Westernization, those are really beautiful, like terminology to touch on, but I'm like, what's the legacy of that? And the legacy of that is the domineering tactics that hinder us from connecting with ourselves, first and foremost, because it's like, if you're trying to connect with Rotuma, understand that you already are Rotuman. Understand that you already are Rotuman at birth, Rotuman. And I'm like, that's where I'm at with this conversation, because I'm like, I do love the word sustainability, but I feel like it's a buzzword for somebody else's dramas. And for me, I'm really invested around what are we able to do and what is our response and our ability. Don't give me the wish-wash of responsibility. What is my response and what is my ability to cater to this conversation? Because I'm already at like student loan, oppression Olympics, systematic oppressions, and also me being in places of power. People are like, what are you doing here? And in my head, I'm like, firstly, I am a male Rotuman, and it's a male Rotuman voice in Kirikiriroa. Specificity matters, especially when you're talking about diasporic experiences. Specificities matters. You're not, and I feel like all of the different ways that we're going into the these and participating with the rest of Aotearoa and the rest of Oceania and the rest of the global world, if we're not being specific, we're actually silencing other voices of Rotuman plights. And that's where I'm like, I don't subscribe to the notion that one tale. So this is something that really sits deeply with my current journey, is Chimamanda Adichie's story of the dangers of a single story. And it's basically saying that no one story can amount to a person. So no one story could ever amount to me. No one story could amount to a community, to a place. And so to me, I'm like, this is why we need to entertain the multiality of what a Rotuman plight is. And so to me, that's my future dream around the Rotuma dream, is that we're understanding that being Rotuman is multifaceted and complex. And we're still trying to reflect that reality, but in attempts to try and reflect that reality, we have these traditionalist, purist Rotuman people who have valid reasons to be concerned. You know, like they have valid. I don't demonize them. They have valid reasons because they can see the hurt, they can see the hardship, and also I'm like, that needs to be mixed in with the fact that we've evolved from replying to colonization. We've evolved from replying to annexation. We've evolved from all of these things. And I'm like, right now, I'm talking to a computer screen, and we're having this beautiful, rich conversation around sustainability and Rotuma. And I'm like, that's our Timamfua's dream, that we would be talking about this still on other people's lands. You know, we would still have this passion and this conversation on other people's lands. And I'm like, if that's not what we're about, I feel like we're discoursing ourselves. And we're currently like hiding behind the curtains of shame and guilt, from my experience. But this is an invitation, even though I'm really passionate about this, I'm really interested to see what everybody else feels in proximity to what I've just shared.
Thanks, your TED Talk.
Love it, Joe. Actually, no, you're right. From my personal experience, like if you take it at face value, I don't speak Rotuman. You know, I'm not fluent. Even at face value, I don't look Rotuman, you know. But my journey for like ever since coming here is like the songs I heard from when I got here versus hearing them again now, I understand a whole lot more, you know. And that's when I realized how much I've learned over the past few years. But if someone was to ask me, do you speak Rotuman? My answer would be no, you know. So like these sort of categories we put ourselves in, whereas our own journeys don't equate that, if that makes sense. So yeah, I really resonated with what she said there.
Yeah, I think mine's similar to Phil, really, like, because while you were talking, I was just like, it just brought me back to, because we met on was it a panel? It was something for Rotuman Language Week. That's how we met. And honestly, like, I was just reflecting on how I felt like going into that language week, coming onto that, because I didn't know any of you, coming onto that panel. I remember feeling really intimidated. I was like, oh my gosh, like, I can't speak the language that well. Like, people always say I don't look Rotuman, like just things like that. But then as I reflect on my journey, like with you guys, because after that conversation that we had, we stayed in touch. Like, you guys have, like, we're close friends now. You guys are soundboards for me whenever I feel like.
Excuse me, I'm just gonna interrupt you there. We family, okay? What are you talking about? We friends? Are you kidding me? Let me just check that. Let me nip that in the bud. We family. You got me tripping out here. Oi, Russell, I think we need to start a union.
But yeah,
18 square miles, guys. We're all related.
But yeah, when I look at where I'm at now, because like, especially like what you were saying about we're still Rotuman, like even like, you know, no matter where we are, no matter what our experience, our knowledge is, like, it doesn't negate the fact that we're Rotuman. And that's something that's really like encouraged me in my journey of like coming to the realization that I am Rotuman, even if I don't look Rotuman, even if people, like, if they see me and they don't think I'm Rotuman, I'm still Rotuman, even if, you know, my boyfriend is white and like all my friends are white, you know, like I'm still Rotuman, like, do you know what I mean? And I feel like that's something that I've always, like, that's your te whakanisitsingo, is like reminding me and just like validating who I am as a Rotuman, even like outside of the island. Because I know we've had a lot of conversations over this where I've been like, oh, you know, I feel so disconnected from the island. So it's like, you know, who am I? Like, who am I here in New Zealand? I know who I am back at home, but who am I here? And I feel like that's really validated that who I am at home is still who I am here. Like, I'm still Richelle Sikori from Itumutai Tutiu. But yeah.
I mean, you know, if I think back to all the times that the discussion has been had about people who are discovering, you know, their families in Rotuma, because my grandparents helped find the roots of someone who traveled from Australia, literally went to the wharf to go to Rotuma, didn't know anyone, but she wanted to start her journey about finding about her great grandfather's roots on the island. And they brought her home and just talked to her and then basically unpacked and worked out where she belongs. But, you know, they never asked me if she could speak Rotuman to see if she's Rotuman, right? And like, that's, you know, even down to how we do things with where we belong in our villages. It's got nothing to do with whether your father's side or your mother's side. You got the blood from wherever side. That's where you belong. That's where home is.
Notch. It's a birthright.
That's right.
I think also it's about, like Richelle said, like this feeling of disconnect from the island. Like, what are you disconnected from? you know, like it's almost like you're disconnected from yourself, but that can't happen because you are the only one in control of your connection with self. So it's about like getting
Where my fan at?
And trusting your hanuchu, you know, like we don't have, our stories are real. Like that's there's what am I trying to say? There's no glamorized version of any of our stories in the diaspora. We've all somehow found ourselves off the island, even the families off in Fiji, you know, like there's a reason why we're all not on Rotuman anymore. So that's the story, like, and that's the beginning. And you don't get to punish yourself or feel guilty for it, because like it couldn't be anything else than what it is. So it's time to take some ownership. I really love what you were saying about like the sustainability word. It kind of almost like brought me back to like, what's the rush? Like I get that we're an endangered language, and probably culture too. And like I said, it's on a basis versus other languages and other cultures across the globe. But like, what is the rush? This is my story today. Like this is where I'm at. And if I'm just listening to songs over and over again until one word sticks in your head, like that's what you do. And that's what I'm going to teach my children. And, you know, and hopefully do want it to get to a place. But then if you're gunning for this end result, for this fluent, you know, you kind of miss all the pieces of the puzzle, which is your hanuchu. It's like, how do I get there? You know, I didn't sit in the class every day. And like I said, we're working twice as hard as other people in the world who, just because we think that we need to get to the finish line, but there is no finish line with this. Like it's culture.
You see, my wish is not that I'll be an amazing Rotuman speaker. My wish is that my daughter speaks better than me, wherever I get to at the end of wherever I'm going with this, right? Is that she's a better Rotuman speaker than I am.
And see, that to me is Rotuman legacy. That is Rotuman sustainability, is the next generation pick it up. And I'm like, that feels naturally sustainable for us. And I'm like, what is that for us? And how do we not get just bandwagoning what sustainability is from the majority? And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I don't demonize. There's a purpose for that. There's a purpose for that. I don't demonize that exists for a reason, but I really feel like we're just missing our own unique peculiarities in this conversation. And that to me is so I wrote this down here, like our hanuchu as a collective requires individual hanuchu to act as ingredients to the recipe of the Rotuman plight. And I'm like, if we don't understand this, not understand this, if we don't understand this, we'll continuously be not enough. That is the recipe to being not enough, is that we're always being voiceless. And when you're voiceless, no one can see you, no one can hear you. And then when you're voiceless, you're also helpless, you know? So to me, I'm like, how are we empowering people to step into their Rotumanness, and with their response and abilities, recognizing their own ritual and daily routine, they can enact what it means to be Rotuman on their own terms, so that they can actually see and transform from this for themselves how a Rotuman feels like in their own specific location. And that to me is the dream. Like to me, I'm like, so to be a Rotuman, you don't have to write in Rotuman. You don't have to write about Rotuma to be a Rotuman. Like you don't have to create things that are like, I'm like, a lawyer that has Rotuman blood, still a Rotuman.
Like you live your life.
But also, one of the other things that I really wanted to give into this space is giving ourselves the permission to be innovative and creative. Because I feel like when this conversation gives us an opportunity, we have to give ourselves the permission to actually enact what it means to be a Rotuman. And I'm like like to me, Philo, your journey as someone who came from Fiji to New Zealand, that's the best Rotuman hanuchu I've seen. I want to hear more of those Rotuman hanuchus, and also the people who also have so much access and also so not enough access. I'm like, we need the multiple hanuchus to actually see what a Rotuman is, and what different Rotuman stories are, and Rotuman lives are led. Because I'm like, our superheroes are everywhere in the world, and we come from, what were you saying? 15 kilometers, 5 kilometers. I'm like,
18 square miles.
We are definitely punching above our weight, fam. We are punching well beyond our weight compared to anybody else. And I'm like, why is that not perpetuated over our lacking? To me, why? Why? What's the reason?
Tell me why.
Yes, so as you can tell, I've spent a lot of time mulling in these conversations, and also I'm very much in a sharing capacity, and I love that you can notice that for me, it's about inviting people to their own Rotumaneity and also being a reminder where people need it, because I'm like, if your whole day is giving you not enoughness at work, not enoughness in your home, I'm like, let your last conversation and your first conversation about being enough as a Rotuman. You know, like if that's the only thing that I can give you, let your last and first conversation be enough of you being a Rotuman.
The next question was actually, how do we sustain our culture in the diaspora? But, you know, we've just had this big conversation about the word sustainability. And so I was just thinking, instead of how do we sustain, I feel like what's more important is how do we maintain our culture, like living in the diaspora. So we can go in the same order, or if you just want to jump in now. But yeah.
I'll speak since I just spoke. But what you just said about not having to be strictly English or strictly Rotuman, the same with tradition and culture, I think, especially in New Zealand, we can't have it exactly how we have it in the island. We don't have exactly the same things or just knowledge to start with. I can't just say I'm going to do something and with my knowledge, it's not going to happen. But, you know, I have an idea of how it should happen. And a lot, I guess, stems back to what we said. If I was to do it, the one thing I'd be worried about is what other people say about it, you know, and that comes, I guess, as a whole community as to how we sort of comment on these kind of things. Like, if you comment on someone not doing traditions right, don't comment to put them down, but comment in like a teaching way. And that, you know, you don't even know sometimes. Maybe they do know how it's supposed to be done. Yeah. But given their resources, they're doing it an amended version. And a lot of the resources, actually one of the programs that we have for Rotuman Language Week is Rotuman recipes with a Kiwi twist. Yeah. You know, that kind of stuff where, you know, obviously we can't just go outside, pick a coconut and scrape it. Like, you know, those kind of little things. Just, we have to find ways to do it in this country, but also I want other people to be more accepting of the fact that things are gonna evolve. Yeah. You're adapting in different environments, and not to sort of criticize. I mean, criticism is good to the fact that we don't go too far away from the tree, but in the way that let it be educational. And yeah, that's sort of
yeah. Philo, you took my answer as well.
That's why I was like going first.
Man, these two must be having sideline conversations, hey? I'm not that sorry. Man, two birds of a feather flock together.
No, but I absolutely, you know, ngoko a in terms of sustaining, you know, it might be the different ingredients, but it's the same, you know, recipe at the end of the day. You know, it's the same outcome at the end of the day. And you know what Phila said of NZRF doing recipes and, you know, substituting different things that we had in the island. Like Mom did taroro the other day, and, you know, she had coconuts, but she had to have she had airtight containers because, you know, we barely find any coconuts here. So it's just substituting stuff like that yeah, it's not the exact same thing, but it's, you know, it's kind of similar.
Good enough.
Yeah, it's good enough. And she, you know, and she made the joke. She made the joke, you know, oh my God, people are gonna watch this and, you know, they're gonna judge. And I'm like, yeah, but this is our recipe. You know, this is how this is the resources that we have, and these are the resources that we're gonna use. You know, it may not be the same as, you know, back in the island, but this is what we're making do with. And I think it's so important because we're away. We need to really think about, you know, what we as a community, our capacity and our abilities, what we can do and what we can, you know, put out to our community in New Zealand. Not, you know, to an extent, you know, you want to be in line with the culture and traditions,
Yeah.
but you also want to be realistic about your goals, you know.
Yeah.
You don't want to put things out and have too much burden on your community, because that's in itself is not maintaining our culture. Like, everyone will be, as what Joe said, burned out, and we don't want that. So,
and I
yeah.
think that just comes back to what Joe said, understanding and not understanding.
Yeah.
I think also, like, what you can teach, like, you know, like I guess we see ourselves as the student, because we're still thinking that we all have so much to learn, but there are people on the island that also like would like to learn. You know, there are people in Fiji that would like to hear about the way that we do things in the diaspora, and how then they can be integrated or changed even more so in their own countries and stuff like that, or on the island. So not limiting yourself by thinking that you're the student only, like you are teaching your truth as well. Sorry.
And I just wanted to add to what you just said, you know, the change thing. I feel like a lot of the times we think change is bad, like especially when it comes to like culture and language, but you know, just realizing that change is not always bad. It like changes how we better our culture and our language. It doesn't necessarily mean it takes away, but yeah.
I want to like give an example of that. You know, pies, like meat pies. My favorite version of a pie is the butter chicken pie. And, you know, that kind of only comes after evolving Russell stuff. But like, you know, you put yourself in a different... Okay, edit this out.
I love how she went straight into pies. And also, Thierry, I just really wanted to add that changes how you perceive it. So it's never bad or good. It's about how you are in proximity to your understanding of what change is. So if it's good or bad, it's because it's a reflection of how you view it. So in my head, I'm like, whenever people are like saying change is bad, I'm like, is that? Like, is that? I mean, yeah, that's all. I digress.
Yeah, no. I think as long as we acknowledge that it's not the original, right? That's where I think a lot of people, you know, as long as we know that this is an adaptation of what it originally is, so that we don't lose touch on that. I think that's the important part.
Gary, did you have something else to add?
I was going to say that, like, maintaining the culture in Australia has been like taking all the opportunities that kind of come up upon. I was like explaining to the group in the group chat earlier that I wanted to work on my pronunciations for a video that a friend here in Australia has asked me to do for Rotuman Language Week, and it's for a group that's like for Pacific youth. So it's like not something that I'm like usually in. It's just something completely different. And I was really interested to do it because they asked me, and I think I was the only Rotuman that they know. And I was really shy as well, because I obviously am not very good at speaking Rotuman at all, putting it nicely. But just taking those opportunities, like if you come upon them, and maybe just putting in that foreword to say, like, you know, this is my hanuchu, and I apologize if it offends anyone, but it shouldn't, because your story isn't made up to offend people. It's just your truth. So yeah, I think that's something that's really important, because sometimes when you don't have access, you kind of think that there's someone else out there that might be a better fit for it. But if it's been put in your path, I think take it, learn from it, and that's the only way that you're going to improve. So
and I think it's also important to do it for yourself, like not to offend anyone, but also not to impress anyone, because at the end of the day, it's your journey.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that's really important in like Australia particularly, and not just Australia, but like a lot of the other countries. I noticed like a lot of family like over in the US or in Britain and stuff like that, and then like we know a lovely lady over in Canada, like they're very small and usually families, like community. It's not like the big ones that you have access to. And it's only now more so that with social media and like the internet and everything that we can connect, which is wonderful and great. But like if you're just sticking in your family and you're soundboarding all the same information, obviously nothing's going to improve. And so people just have to be, I guess, not fearful to like step outside of those communities and look for new spaces and new opportunities. And when it's offered, even if you don't think you're the right fit, you are, because it's come to you. So yeah.
And how would they know the difference anyway?
True.
Make it. That goes back to what Shelly said at the start, though, right? You said you weren't sure with the last panel if you were even Rotuman and I mean, look at you, look at us now.
Look at us now.
Lovely.
I was enough, guys.
You were
more than enough.
Okay, we'll move to Russell.
I'm with everything you guys have said. I think the thing that I think about when we're talking about sustaining, maintaining is actually just really not losing any bits. We've already lost so much. You know, I'm very, very jealous when I see islanders with tattoos because we gave ours up. You know what I mean? And who knows what else. And so when I think about our culture and our traditions that we have left, totally, we need to make do on how to keep it alive and you know, apply new methods to do old things. But actually losing it all together, I'm not ready to accept that at all. And so that's why it's really important to me that accessibility, because you know, it's been documented, no doubt. I think documented heavily, but why can't I see any of that? You know what I mean? So that accessibility to seeing what the different protocols are for different functions, that should be readily available to anyone and everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that gives us the opportunity to change it and improve it if we want.
Yeah.
But you know, without knowing it, we're just doing our own thing, and bit by bit, our traditions end up as something that someone's going to discover when they look in some book in the Hawaii University on a shelf somewhere.
Don't start with me. You know, I'm already armored for that weapon. I'm already weaponed up for that.
See, yeah, I think that's the thing for me, is that's the biggest thing. It's just not losing. Yeah.
I think as long as you know, we are still here, we're still in these spaces, like whether it looks different in the future or not, like as long as we're, you know, continuously working towards like elongating our culture and language. Come on.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, think about it. We don't know all the traditions, right?
Yeah.
We know the ones that we're always involved in. You know, we can talk about mamasa for healing. We can talk about mamasa for travel. We can talk about weddings. But any of you ever seen a chief buried and how that happens in your own village, right? Because that'll be different.
Yeah.
Like that's the type of stuff I'm talking about. That dilution of those things. Yeah, that scares me. That keeps me up.
Documentation is key. Is it documented, or are these just?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's why I'm really passionate about. So when we look at bodies of knowledge seek to live in other bodies. So if you've got thoughts and whakaro and ahe, like aone la takoke o ahe e takoke se puku la pola le waki le leum e utentorit e avatentorit la amuroke o ahe. So when we're looking at laying down your perspectives, you lay them down on books so that other people can then pick up your books and then live. You know, that's the whole point of the living word. You know, people have picked up the word and now they're living and embodying it. And I think that's the most, I feel like for me anyways, and the way that I'm having this relationship with religiosity and in a Rotuman context, that's the most potent thing that I feel like religion brought to us, is that they brought like when we look in between all of the intersectionalities, and when we're purposefully looking for the te whakanisi that religiosity brought to us, they brought to us how we can lay down our perspectives on a different body so that it can have some sort of sustenance and sustainability and maintain blah, blah, blah. But for me, that's what I like. That's why for me, I've had a completely different perspective on what academia is and what is writing and what is all of these things, because we're able to see deeply that if we don't remember our history, we rely on other bodies of knowledges. So it could be paintings, it could be carvings, it could be tattoo, it could be all of these different things. And for me, that's one of my personal like goals in life right now. And it's not so much a goal that I'm like, oh my God, I want to do this. It's like, I just have this innate, like, lalang na tuhunga, daka forex singo e kopla la fuar ma fakman yo ek asang fakrutwamda. And it's like, you have to go and show off, and you also have to go and highlight all the nuances of the Rotuman plight. And I'm like, for me, this is what it means to be creative and innovative, when you understand that everybody has that capacity to share a story. So your story, everybody's a storyteller, and their modalities of expression could be singing, music, arts, performance, all of these different things. And we're all invited to look and dabble with our modalities of expressions. And if we don't understand that, we get stuck behind the gate and judgment and all of these things about people who are actually doing the work. So for me, when you're not in the field, like, cool, you can have your sideline comments, or even you can have sharp articulations. Like, to me, I'm like, I'm at a point with my practice and with my rituals where I'm like, it needs to be sharpened. You know, like, to me, I'm like, I'm looking to be sharpened, because truth exists in ecosystems of truth from my worldview. So if I have this peculiarity of how I'm experienced of being Rotuman in this geographical location, I'm going to speak that truth. And this is why, for me, specificity matters. And I just want to echo that everybody else here was talking about specificity. Be specific. Otherwise, you're pacifying other perspectives and experiences. So if you're not being specific about the recipe and how that recipe elongated to an Aotearoa recipe and how that's changed because of the resources that's available to us, we're then telling this absolutist story of what a Rotuman is. And I'm like, I feel like there's also other perspectives on this, on how we do this on the island. There's 7 districts, and all of them are trying to out-Rotuman each other. And in my head, I'm like, guys, if we just zoom out a little bit more, all of your specificities are actually what makes Rotuman so juicy. You know, we've got 3 variations of the language. We've got the Wesleyan, the Catholic, and then the old Rotuman language, and even more than 3 probably variations of the language. And I'm like, this, when we zoom out, that's a collective truth that elongates and enriches what a Rotuman is, and what being like, what it means to stand in your Rotumaneity, and to stand as someone who deeply understands that we need variation and diversity of the Rotumanness to actually articulate a Rotuman worldview and a Rotuman philosophy. And that's where I'm at a point where I'm like, what is the Rotuman worldview? And the Rotuman worldview has to be enriched and filled by each individual Rotuman. So every Rotuman has this investment in this, has this birthright, has this response and ability. And at the same time, I'm like, I guess for me, I'm like, how do I become a reminder? How do I invite people to this collective body of knowledge, this collective ways to sharpen each other? Because I'm like, I'm really not that fragile about being sharpened. What scares me is that people are not going to give me the sharpening I need, because they think that I'm too prissy to receive it. And I'm like, I don't really mind that, but also, in echoing Thierry's perspectives, safe spaces, safe conversations, because the generational differences have different modalities of communication, which is lacking in heart. It's lacking in Hanisi, and Miav Hanisi at that. So Miav Hanisi, the plethora of ways that we show off Mafakmonyo Ek as Rotuman way of being. So to me, I'm really nervous that we don't get that there is specificity that needs to be invited in this, but also that your individual plight is actually a part of a collective individual plight called the Rotuman worldview or the Rotuman philosophy. And I'm like, if we don't understand, so the way that I see this, and this is in respect to mana whenua on this land, is that I was inspired by the word te ao Māori. And Te Ao Māori is the Māori worldview, but also there's very rich, different iwis have a perspective on what Te Ao Māori is. And I'm like, that's how we should be looking at the Rotuman worldview. Different districts have specificity and a relationship based on their geographical location and based on their rituals and ceremony and based on the way that they embody what being a Rotuman is, being inspired by nature and the elements, our ancestral elements. And that's the part where I'm like, I'm missing these conversations in the adults, but at the same time, there's also a unique recipe of why they don't want to talk about these things, because they're like, we need to survive. We need to stop being an overdraft. We need to stop asking for loans. So these are all the systematic oppressions that I feel like we're not even talking about. The adults are still wayfinding that. And I give respect to that, because I feel like there's grace and humility that I have for our elders, because their struggle is completely different to ours. Ours is a struggle of communication. Theirs is a struggle of survivance. And that's something that, well, especially if you're a diasporic. So let me be specific. When you're in the diaspora, our struggle is a struggle of communication and trying to one-upmanship each other, when I'm like, everybody's Rotuman. What is the problem? Why are we still trying to perpetuate this one lens or one-sided story, which is completely dangerous? It's completely dangerous to sustainability.
Like the focus is wrong, hey? Like where
it makes no sense.
It reminds me a lot of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mob here, like all over Australia. Like that's been their plight for a while, has been a focus on like the loss of language, or well, really just the loss, like, you know, what they've missed, and like, you know, tracing bloodlines and all those kinds of things. That I'm saying this from a mainstream perspective. I'm definitely not in their mobs, and so I feel like that's what is being projected outwards to mainstream Australia, is like, you know, they've got stolen generation all over the place. They've got language so much that they've lost. We don't even know, like, different mobs and stuff like that. But in the reality, like, they are mapping it out, and they are being true to their stories and their own focus. And you can find all these amazing resources that so many have worked on. But I feel like I just didn't quite think about that about Rotuman, you know, like, I guess maybe because it's so small and so endangered, that like even like Native Hawaiians, you know, have this same kind of issue as well. Like a lot of these endangered cultures and languages, where they're almost getting grouped into just one country, one people kind of thing, when it's like, no, there's so many different mobs, so many different village and nuances amongst them all that are a truth.
And echoing all of that, it's a bit like, to me, in my experience, how I've been in proximity to all of these, this collective umbrella terming, right? Is because it's palatable to the Western mind. That we're exotic islands. That we're, you know, it's so I think it's Edward Said Orientalism, where they just like, we're being oriented that the Pacific is this, or that islanders are this, and then we ourselves do the same thing. You know, we ourselves do the same thing, and it's very much carried through capitalism and tourism as well. But being focused on this specific conversation, I feel like the question I want to ask is, why is it so palatable for Indigenous people to assimilate into that? Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, it's because we haven't had the education. Also, we haven't had experiences in proximity to whiteness where we can stand on our own grounds and be the complexity that we are, but then we like politely, so humbly accept that they're complex beings. Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, this is something that is a superpower for us, though. This is something that's, because we're always in the background. And I'm like, boo, when I'm in the background, observatory, I witness all of the BS. And I'm like, if you want to be checked, I got receipts, come through. But at the same time, I'm like, I'm not that's not Miav Hanisi. Like, that to me isn't, like, I don't want to go and fuck man yo eko toanga, mo to ahei, mo to ine, mo to hunga, mo to fot manava tapu. So like, I don't want to go and show off my perspectives, my intuition, the ways that I show up my heart in a way that's demonizing to people who are experienced. So in my worldview, people are experiencing Rotumans firsthand, and it's like their first encounter through everyone in this room.
Yeah, that's
so their first encounter of Rotuman it's sad, but we become 100% teachers on site, and then we become idolized as like, you know, the preferential Rotuman. And I'm like, it makes no sense that they would reach out to Moluseo to look at it as this educational giant. And in my head, I'm like, this is privileged access. I've had privileged access to academia, and that's what I'm continuously committed to, is debunking my privilege in public so that other people can realize that it's a hard journey. My mom had to travel the 7 seas to give remittances back to Rotuma so that I can show up at your boardroom and tell you that you're not meeting equity. Like, that's a reflection of reality for me. I'm in overdraft with the bank and with all of these different systems so that I can survive and show up in these at work. And if that's not leadership as a Rotuman, I don't want it, because it's not a reflection of reality.
Mm-hmm.
For me though, and I know I sound really passionate about it, but it's because I'm like, I'm not hearing these honest integrity truths that are coming out of being like, this is a struggle for us to even show up at work, and our people at home idolize us for having jobs and ask for remittances, and they have no idea as well that we're struggling to even be at work. We're struggling to even identify as a Rotuman at work, let alone even think of, because I'm like, yo, these systems and processes, I'm like, yo, these make no sense. Was this made for a human? But yeah, so yeah, offering as an invitation. Anybody else got a perspective on that?
I want to take it back a bit to where you were talking about appreciating the differences across, you know, even for us, the districts, right? I mean, you mentioned the westernization thing. It's a tired song, but we're all living in territories drawn by old men. Right? You go to Cook Islands, they're all different people, but we call them the Cook Islands. But island by island, they don't look at each other as the same people. And it's the same with us. It's the same with everywhere in the Pacific.
Notch.
It's the same with Fiji before Luxembourg decided to cede us to Britain. They were all different people in different tribes, and they all united just to stop Mafu coming through. But you know, it's that's the thing. We're all different people, and I don't know. Maybe it doesn't make sense to split us all up again. But yeah, I think appreciating the differences is important, and actually recognizing that we're different. It's the same in China. China's got all those different people.
100%.
They're all Chinese. Well, no, they're not.
I think people also tend to think that just because we're different people, we're divided. I feel like just
so true. So true. We're a fan of that. Oh, I hate the Sun Siran.
But yeah, I think and honestly, I feel like I'm going down a different road now. But like for me, like when I think about how, you know, listening to all of you guys, when I've been thinking about how do I maintain, like, you know, the culture and traditions that we have, because I don't have any, like I only have Tongan friends down here. I don't have any Rotuman friends down here, and the majority of my friends are Pākehā, white Kiwis. My partner is white as well, and I feel like for me, how I, you know, maintain my culture is like I tell him, like, if he does something that is not cultural for me, I'll be like, oh, you know, like, by the way, for us, like, PDA is not PDA is not in our culture. So if you come to our meetings, don't hold my hand. So like, you know, just things like that. I feel like when we think about, you know, I feel like it's easy to be like, oh no, I have to do all these like grand gestures to like make the culture and stuff. But for me, I found that like it's in the little things as well. You know, just
100%.
Yeah, because you know, like just being like, you know, for us culturally, when we're having conversations with adults, we don't like. First of all, we don't just address them by first name. There's, you know, that respect level, but also like, because there's always been the question, like, you know, you don't have to do all these things. Like, just because they asked you to do it doesn't mean you have to do it. And I'm like, well, actually, you know, I was raised traditionally. When my father says, "Come running," I sprint.
I'm Usain Bolt with it.
The runner to the texter. So I think just like little things like that. And, you know, like one of the most interesting things that has come out of it is like, because I feel like there's this like mainstream, what's this that like, you know, white people look down on us and all that. But like what I've learned from my friends, and I know that it might be a privilege, like Ryan loves having those conversations, or maybe he doesn't. Maybe he just
Right.
maybe he just loves me.
Ryan, the helpline's here for you.
Ryan, blink if you need help.
But you know what I mean? I feel like the more I feel like there's this like we're scared to have these conversations, or like to just be Rotuman because we feel like, oh, you know, we have to be like white, like, you know, whitewashed. But I feel like when you're genuinely just you, I feel like people they accept it. Like and I think it just comes back to like who what are we doing it for? Like, are we doing it like not to offend someone? Are we doing it to impress? Then I think at the end of the day, if we decide like, look, maintaining my culture and my language is important to me, this is how I can do it, these are the resources I have, like Helena said, I'm just going to go with it, be innovative, like Joe said. I feel like that really helps push, you know, like push our Rotumanness forward, even if it doesn't look like what people think it should look like.
And when we're looking at trans-Indigenous like modalities of exchange, and when it comes to value exchange, we need to embrace that nuancity as well. Like we need to embrace the fact that everybody's got a different embodiment of their values, embodiment of their hearts, embodiment of XYZ. And to me, there's a beautiful triangular relationship between ignorance, innocence, and arrogance, because there's honest ignorance, there's honest innocence, and there's also honest arrogance. And I hate, that's the one that I really struggle to balance with, because I'm like, you know, people are conditioned to speak in a certain way. And in my head, I'm like, oh, when I've had an honest conversation with some people that I've been in proximity with, they just didn't know that that's how they were coming off. And in my head, I'm like, oh, there's a difference between that and actually just arrogance, you know? And I feel like in a lot of the conversations, because they don't know and they're not in proximity to Rotumans, you know, they like their first reaction most of the time is, what is that closest to? And I'm like, yep, it's sick and tiring. Like I get tired of it. And I sometimes want to just wear like a shirt that says here, XYZ, or like just, you know, our top, there's always a top 5 questions around Rotuman. And I'm like, come on, we need to bank off this. Okay. We need to actually get some money out. So let's answer the top 5 questions and put it on a shirt. But there's honest ignorance. And to me, I'm like, I really had to get comfortable with the fact that sometimes people are not coming for me. They're actually, they've never experienced what it means to be in proximity to Rotumans. And I'm like, or to Pacific Islanders.
Especially where you're living, Joe.
No, there's a lot of kind people here. There's a lot of kind people here. No, but yeah, I really appreciate, like, that was a really good lens check for me when I started to really be in community, because that sharpened my fragility around why people can relate to me. And I really thought that, you know, people were coming for me at a lot of the times. And half the times it's the tonality for me, where I'm like, I hear tone and your approach was not okay, but what is your intention? So we're coming back full circle to the beginning. What is your intentionality with your curious question? I don't know why I said curious like that, but what is your curious question and how can I meet you there? And, you know, so I feel like when we're looking at intention, and yeah, intention's not always the best thing, because for me, it's about your impact. And for me, they have a beautiful relationship, but I really feel like when we're encountering the fact that we are unique unicorns in a sea of people that don't know how to relate to us, that's a power. That's a unique superpower that we have. And when you can step into it, when you feel comfortable and when you feel safe to do it, it's a beautiful educational journey. But in doing so, to me, it took me ages. Like, I really struggled with the fact that I kept on looking back at the island and was like, I'll never be enough. And I feel like I really want to echo that. That was a massive lull in my life where I didn't feel like I was enough as a Rotuman. I didn't feel like I could embody a New Zealand specific like identity of being a Rotuman. And I'm like, the only person that I needed to give myself permission was me. And it was a struggle, but at the same time, I feel like that's now my reminder. I'm like, that's my work for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Having like grace and empathy for others, but for yourself, like
Yeah.
first and foremost, like we only meet people as deeply as you meet yourself. But also like from what I'm hearing, you know, like we are also such proud Rotumans, and Rotuman is so special, you know, like, and it's a beautiful island and there's so much richness there. But having empathy for the and grace for the human condition, like we are also, even though we sometimes look at ourselves as the diaspora, that we don't have some privileges that other people on the island have and stuff like that, like how privileged are we to have this blood in our veins and to have access to just know that, you know, like there's like entire beings out there that are walking around and don't even know who their parents are.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that like it's just having a bit of grace for others and for the human condition, and that when people approach you, I'm not saying educate everyone, like that is like, I wish I could educate like Joe, like I'm very bad at telling people things and like and articulating it nicely for people and stuff. But so definitely if it's not your place, but like we all know resources, at least I imagine us here, and then those that will even watch this, like this is a resource. Like share it, like keep some of the words that are flowing through or the points, and then when somebody does approach you, like anything, if they were asking me, a nurse, how to like look after diabetes, like obviously something I learned 3 years ago in a class is going to come up in my head. Like let's stop acting as if like we don't have it, you know, like we always need more access, more knowledge, more connection and stuff like that. Like we've got everything that we need within ourselves, and it's just about sharing the truth, sharing your truth with others and what they share back as well. Like I imagine even Richelli's partner, like that's a story within itself. He is like dating one of the best looking Rotuman woman that I know of, you know, like imagine him going to work and sharing like with his co-workers who his partner is. Like these are all special parts of a complex being that everyone is.
But honestly, I feel like, you know, just listening to what you guys have just said, I feel like for a long time I was really stuck in this like victim mentality, like, oh yeah, like yes, we are in the like oppression Olympics, all that, and yes, we do have like barriers to access. But I think sometimes when we're so stuck in it, like it's easy to forget that we still have a lot of mana, like, you know, like there's still things about me that, like, yes, I can have the victim mentality, but if I don't come to the realization that I do, you know, I still have a lot of value, regardless of what I don't have in my toolkit or not. Like, I feel like just tapping into that, you know, what I don't want to say power, but just tapping into that, you know.
Mana, you said it.
Yeah. I said mana, and then I was like, wait, what's the Rotuman word?
No.
Yeah. So I feel like just, you know, it's okay to know that this is where you are, but it's also okay to be like confident in, you know, this is where you are, but you still like
confident to be where you are.
Yeah.
Just going all the way back to something Joe said and I commented on, that like writing a book, like saying your story, everyone has different stories. I feel like we're in the privileged position of being on the internet. Like this is how we all know each other, how we met and how we sustain our friendships.
This is 6 chapters right here.
Yeah, like, and it's our book, like our accounts, our Instagram accounts, Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts. It's like a live document. And for me, like sustaining being Rotuman is following all you guys, seeing, like, realizing that we're all different, we're all living different lives, we're all living different Rotuman lives. But yeah, just right, I guess.
Hard. I really like the concept. Have you all heard of digital mafua? So that's a concept that Renata Varia, as well as so in their conversations with Jason, what's his name? Anyways, they wrote a piece on remittances in Rotuman, and basically really highlighted one of the biggest I feel like it's one of the biggest concerns for me in terms of how much money is going through Rotuma, but not enough that is actually catering to the sustainability of the land and to the functionality of the land from my perspective in Aotearoa. So I don't know what's happening over there. So I'm just going to say that my privilege lens from here, from my judgmental ivory tower, is I really like the way that they talked about writing the new world or our experiences online, and then online becomes a digital mafua. So that, like, our online presence of how we share all our stories, then online becomes this grandparent for us, like a te mamfua, or becomes this one-stop shop for everything Rotuma. And I don't think that Rotumans on Facebook is the best example of that, but I feel like it is. When we look and read in between the lines of why we're so fragmented, I feel like the fragmentation is actually a result of all of our various access points to education, and that's something that's how I'm looking at all of the disagreements and all of the XYZs on like all the different platforms that we have. Is I'm like, the disagreements is actually a really clear indication of where all of us are at and how we're actually talking past each other. And that's something that I'm like, that's where for me, I'm like, it's a communication problem. Our generation is struggling with a communication problem where we're actually seeking to understand, seeking to really embrace somebody else's worldview as opposed to prescribing or front loading their experience for them. And that's something, to me, I'm beginning to realize that that's a silencing mechanism. When we remove people's process their gift to process their own hurt or their own story or their own wayfinding, that's neocolonialism. That's you're taking away people's right to voice and choice. And I'm like, that's something that I'm really fascinated by, because I'm like, I don't really mind the disagreements. I don't mind the fragmentation. What I do mind is that no one's talking about the common theme, which is miscommunication, for me anyways. And also going back to what you were saying, I feel very much like, how do I say this? Te whakanisro road, isman te whakanisro road, mur e awa te is. Like in front of you, we've got so many extensions of love as well as gifts. And I'm like, that's something that we're missing. We're missing when we're looking elsewhere for inspiration. I'm like, right in front of us is where it's at. Right in front of you, who you are, that's the te whakanisi. Like, I think about Rotuma as our motherland, but I'm like, she has strategically placed us in the diaspora to articulate her story and to be the voice pieces of her intelligence. And I'm like, when we understand that we're walking fruits of Rotuma, we can then embody what it means to be a Rotuman voice and to echo her sounds from the diaspora. And that's something that I'm inspired by all of our Pacific scholars, because they really give me a different vision to push the boundaries of what imagination is in relationship with futurity. Like, that's something that I'm like, I really lean on that. And our Pacific scholars are strong, man. Our Pacific scholars are potent. And I'm like, it's really interesting that we're always seeking knowledge that's outside of the region. And I'm like, bro, and the region is pretty bomb. Right here is pretty bomb. So yeah, that's how I always fashion myself, and I'm always introducing myself as a walking fruit of Rotuma that echoes her sounds and her beauty and her intelligence.
And I don't want to cut everyone else off, but I feel like this is a good place to end. We've been on for an hour and a half. So the takeaway point right now is, if you look around, you can't find it, look within. So we're gonna end it there. If you had anything else to say, you can say it after I stop this recording.
If you want to hear more, please like, comment, subscribe.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
Send all inquiries to Russell.
Yeah.
I just got here. I don't know what's going on.
You've been voluntold as admin.
Richali said for me to come for all the non-Rotuman speaking Rotumans to understand what's going on.
We have these spaces every now and then.
Thank you guys for joining me tonight. I know this was really last minute. I just asked you 2 days ago, but you all graciously accepted. So thank you for that. Thank you for being a good support system for me here, and I know other Rotumans here as well. I'll link their pages when they when they post this video. So you guys can go to them for safe spaces too. But yeah, happy Rotuman Language Week, everyone.
Right.
Yeah, should we? We'll
Please,
edit.
please edit this heavily.
Nope. No editing. Take us as we are.
Bye.
Bye.
Tra la 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 la.